Hi, this is Emily Saliers from Indigo Girls, and you're listening to Rainbow Country.
The views and opinions expressed on the following program are those of the persons appearing on the program.
A secret consortium, a bent banker, and a desperate lawyer are all that stands between Elliott Snowmaker and the inheritance of her great-uncle's failing aircraft restoration business. Today on Rainbow Country, award-winning author, pilot, engineer, Sheryl Wright joins me in conversation to talk about her latest novel, Illusion Lake. That and so much more in episode 272, so stay tuned for Gay Talk Radio right here on Rainbow Country.
Hi, I'm Simone Denny.
Hi, I'm Mary John Tory.
I'm Joey Lamar, best-selling author of Mambo Lips and Salsa Hips. You're listening to Rainbow Country with Mark Tara.
Well, hello and welcome to a brand new journey through Rainbow Country. As I like to call it, a little gay radio show working to give voice to the LGBT community and beyond. And as always, I am your tour guide through Rainbow Country. I'm producer and host, Mark Tara. By the way, Rainbow Country originates from CIUT FM in Toronto, the sound of your city, and now proudly in syndication on 10 outlets across Canada. So, from the Yukon to the prairies, to the east coast of Canada in the Maritimes, to Ontario, even down to Buffalo, New York, and online. Thanks to you tuning in, streaming, downloading, but ultimately listening. Together, we continue to build Rainbow Country into a nationally syndicated gay radio show, a #1 LGBT podcast, and a top 100 LGBT podcast to follow. So today, award-winning author Sheryl Wright joins me to talk about her current novel, Illusion Lake, her time as a commercial pilot, and so much more. Plus, music from LGBT artists, independent artists, voices that we've come to know and love in classic disco, classic 80s, classic house, and on this episode I'm featuring some classic house, some classic RuPaul, as well as a spotlight on independent LGBT artists, songwriter, producer, and remixer Paul Andrews, and from Chicago, deep trance duo Dance Loud. But up first, Rainbow Country contributor, multidisciplinary artist, Kat Grant, talks about the importance of gender parity in the visual arts.
Hi there, my name is Kat Grant. I'm speaking today about gender parity in the arts, specifically about the representation of women artists. Women have historically been restricted to inside work and domesticity, and is mostly the subject of the male artist's gaze, objectified and sexualized. Changing that gaze started when the prestigious Royal Academy in England started accepting female students in 1860. It's 141 years later, and women earn 75% of Bachelor of Fine Arts degrees and 65 to 75% of Master of Fine Arts degrees. We've come a long way, baby. Why, then, are only 46% in all disciplines of art women? And what about equality in the amounts earned from our art? Museums and galleries like to promote that they are being more attentive to women artists now. This is an illusion. According to ArtNet, just 11% of all acquisitions and 14% of exhibitions were female. Many galleries that profess to promote equality still have twice as many men as women on their gallery walls. At auction between 2008 and 2019, more than $196.6 billion has been spent on art. Work by women accounts for $4 billion. That's a big number. Sounds like a lot, until you do the math and realize that women only made up 2% of the sales. Those sales that were made by women at auction were also discounted by 47.6%. Here's another way to look at this. Works by Pablo Picasso generated $4.8 billion at auction during that same period of time. That grand sum was more than the total amount spent on the entirety of the female artists' auctioned works combined. Not only is the women artist market smaller, it proportionately is concentrated on just 5 well-known female artists. In other words, 41% of the market share is split by these 5 women. It's discouraging. People believe that women artists are making large strides, but if you take those particular 5 women out of the equation, in essence, nothing has changed. This disparity is particularly flagrant when one considers the impact that female artists have had on male artists, and indeed on the entire history of art. I recently was at Canada's National Art Gallery in Ottawa. I was delighted to see more representation of female artists than when I was a young girl. I recognized myself on those gallery walls, and it moved me. It occurred to me, while the women's work there seemed groundbreaking, that even after almost 150 years of professional training and a higher amount of women artists graduating from art schools, it's not enough. There needs to be more representation, and indeed a celebration of female artists. There are ways to make this happen globally. For Rainbow Country, this is Kat Grant, a multidisciplinary artist and executive director of Toronto's Goddess Day Arts Festival.
Hi, my name is Joanne Vanicola, and I'm an actor and a writer, and I was first on Rainbow Country with Mark Tara on discussing the massacre at Pulse Club in Orlando. I realized how important it was for our community to have a radio station, specifically for our issues, to talk about people in the LGBTQ community and to provide an outlet for our stories, to discuss our politics, culture, and give voice to the issues that matter to us. And of course our artists and the things that we do globally, and talk about culture. And without people like Mark Tara providing a space for this with a radio show like this, then we wouldn't have that voice. So support, tune in. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. This is Gino Vanelli. You're listening to Rainbow Country with Mark Tara.
Elliott doesn't think twice about leaving her home in Toronto and making the long trip to New Mexico and Illusion Lake. Once there, she soon discovers that somebody wants her gone, and gone fast. Up next, award-winning author Sheryl Wright starts us off with a reading from her current novel, Illusion Lake.
Mile after mile for the last 100 miles, dried out and frozen cattle pastures and the interstate were her only companions as she drove southwest into New Mexico. With no schedule to follow, she pushed hard, not to get there, as much as her need just to be going somewhere, doing something, anything. It had taken 32 hours of hard winter driving, broken only by a restless night's stay at a cheap hotel, to get here from Toronto. Here. It wasn't much to look at. When Elliott Snowmaker pulled herself from her beat-up Jeep and took stock of what was left of a once bustling airport operation, her heart almost hurt as much as her back. The only runway that looked usable was littered with milestones and junk that probably fell off cars racing here illegally. The only buildings left standing were a boarded-up old wood shack, a dilapidated brick building with peeling gray paint, identifying it as the airfield, fire station, and an enormous rusting Quonset hut, probably a relic of World War II. It was the only hangar left standing. The painted lettering on the Quonset hut doors, like the rest of the place, had been left to fade and peel, but it was still legible. Elliott's Aircraft Restoration. We specialize in warbirds, antiques, and vintage airplanes. All makes and models welcome. There was no denying this was the place. As soon as she did the paperwork, it would all be hers. Question was, what the hell was she going to do with it?
Sheryl Wright. Hi, how are you?
I am absolutely wonderful. How are you?
I am well. Thank you for coming back to Rainbow Country, to have your voice, your story be heard by the LGBT community and beyond, to talk about your current novel, Illusion Lake. This is your current work, yes?
Yes, it is. It just came out a few weeks ago.
4 out of 5 stars on Amazon.ca. How does that make you feel?
Actually, I started reading the reviews, which is something I never do. Mm-hmm. And they are so wonderful and generous. And it seems that everyone is really, really enjoying it, which makes me so happy.
Well, you just mentioned reading your reviews. Some reviews are calling this latest novel, Illusion Lake, an action-packed mystery novel. Another reader, simply put, it is one of the best crime books I've read this year. Another reader, a page-turning mystery romance. Okay, Sheryl Wright, you are the creator, the author, the writer of Illusion Lake. What is the story that you're telling in this novel?
I have 2 protagonists, and they're both, Torontonians who are placed in a different world for a little while. One's a lawyer who was taking over her dad's practice in Illusion Lake, New Mexico, while he's off for health reasons. And the other is a down-and-out pilot who ends up there to receive an inheritance, which turns out to be something completely different than what she was expecting. And the intrigue centers around what she's inherited, which she thinks is just a failing aviation business, but turns out to be something completely different.
And I guess therein lies part of the mystery.
Well, exactly. I wanted to write a mystery where there's, people aren't getting killed and maimed and the normal things you expect from a mystery aren't going on, and centered around something that people take for granted and have no idea what a commodity this particular thing is, and what's at risk. And it just came flowing, all these ideas, and I basically had to stitch them together, and here we are. La la.
Is this a work of fact or fiction, or both?
It's a little bit of both. This is obviously a fictional tale, but in a way it might be a bit of a warning tale that we should be paying attention to this particular thing, and because our lives depend on it, but we just don't take it. We don't really understand how important and precious it is.
And this novel, Illusion Lake, what inspired this particular novel for you to write this? What inspired it, the story?
Well, it started as a very easy thing. We were going to do a convention in New Mexico, and I thought, wouldn't it be cool if I had a book that was centered somewhere in New Mexico? It came out at the same time as the convention for the Golden Crown Literary Society. So I started writing it and started researching, and I was looking at all the normal culprits from, cattle ranching to oil production, and came across a little tiny note that on the subject that it's on, and realized this is much bigger. And I have a fan who's in her 90s. She is absolutely amazing. She served for 30 years in the U.S. Army as a JAG officer, and then became a judge in California and lived in San Francisco for years, and is now very much retired. But, think of like one of those TV judges, but only absolute wonderful lesbian who knows everything. And I wrote her a letter and I said, is this an issue? Is this really a thing? And she wrote back and she said, it's the most complicated area of law and one that like nobody's even studying or looking into. And she gave me a couple of things to work on. And it was just amazing this note she sent me. And it just bloomed from there.
And this novel, Illusion Lake, how long did it take for you to put this whole project together?
It takes me on average about 5-6 months to write a novel. This one was both easier and harder because the technical details had to be spot on. And I wasn't familiar with this area, so I had to do, a little research. But the rest of the story, it was already in me, I guess. So it flowed. And that made it a lot easier.
So I often ask this next question to writers. And it's just simply this. It's a crazy little question, but I get pretty much the same crazy little answer, which makes me think, okay, maybe writers are a little bananas. But the question is simply this: do the characters that you create and that you write, fictional characters, do they end up taking on a life of their own and they start dictating to you? They start telling you where to take them and how they want their story to be told. Do the fictional characters that you create and you write, do they end up taking on a life of their own?
Only the good ones.
Okay.
And absolutely. If you create a good character, I don't mean it as a good personality or a good bad character, whatever they are, but if you create a strong character and you've sat down, you've put together their characteristics in your head or on paper and decided, their personality type, once that's established, they really, really write their part of the story or their behaviors during it, or, when they flip out, when they do great heroic things, when they're just damn stupid. It's really, they're telling me what they're going to do and what they're not going to do. And because it rings true, I can write a whole chapter and read it back and say, this is not that person. I don't know who I'm writing about. And then, and you just rip that out and start again and just close your eyes for a minute. Let that character lead you, and you want A, B, and C to happen through that character, but they'll tell you how they're going to do it. So, if they're going to jump A, kick B, and fall down for C, then that's the way it's going to happen. So, I guess songwriters might tell you a very similar thing once they've got, a chorus down, everything else comes, or maybe once they've got, several lines down, and the chorus just flows. So it's something, maybe even painters have their own thing too. Once you let that inner thing happen, you're being dictated to, and in a most wonderful, amazing way.
You've written a number of books. You've won a number of awards. Your novels tend to be LGBT oriented. Is that a fair statement to say?
Oh, yes. I don't see that changing anytime soon. And some people say, well, they're romances. I don't write a straight up romance. And people, if you look at my reviews, they'll say that, no, this is like a meteor book with a real story. The romance gets sprinkled in there because, well, I want to provide a little bit of hope for anybody who's reading. The stories are complicated as life can be, but the characters need a break too. So a little romance goes a long way. And I think we all need a little bit of that in our life.
And why is it important for you to tell stories that have LGBT romance in it? Why is this important for you to write the novels that you do? I'm going to tell something I've never told anybody. I turned 60 this year. And I know I can't even fathom that. So anybody who thinks 60 is old, so do I. So I don't know how that happened. But whether you're coming out today or when I came out, 42 years ago, coming out is hard and it's painful. And the other thing is coming out doesn't stop. It's not a one and done. You're constantly coming out for the rest of your life. And being LGBT can be wonderful when you find yourself and you find your community, when you build friends. But until that time, it is probably the toughest thing any person has to go through. It's certainly the most character building thing, and it will make you stronger by coming out and being who you are. And I guess when I write my characters, whether they're just coming out or they've been out for years, the romance part is just a little thing that I do to make sure that people who read my stories get the idea that there is always hope.
There is always someone out there, you know, I don't want to say waiting for you, but their romance is there. It's going to happen. You know, if you're feeling lonely and isolated and that, don't worry. You're going to meet people eventually by accident, and things will happen. And I write stories where people meet by accident, or they're, you know, sort of enemies to friends type thing, or adversaries at least. And the idea is that you're going to find love in the strangest places. But the first thing you have to do is be yourself and stand up for the things you believe in. Then everything else falls into place.
And on that note, we will return after this Rainbow Country update.
Hi, I'm Keegan Hurst, former professional rugby player, coach, raving homosexual, and you're listening to Rainbow Country with Mark Tara.
So, as you know, Rainbow Country is heard on 10 outlets across Canada. Well, that's all about to change as of Friday, October the 22nd. Because Rainbow Country will be heard in British Columbia on Kootenay Co-op Radio, CJLY 93.5 FM, your friendly neighborhood radio station in Nelson, BC. So now we can officially say that this little gay radio show, Rainbow Country, is now heard coast to coast to coast.
Hi, I'm writer Adam Smith, author of Deep Sniff, A History of Poppers and Queer Futures. You're listening to Rainbow Country with Mark Tara.
You are an award-winning writer, author, but you didn't start out wanting to be an author. My understanding is you started out wanting to be an astronaut. So so when did you realize that you can be a writer? When did that switch happen for you?
You know, I did some writing in high school, and I was a cadet and air cadet, and I wrote a little, you know, newspaper for them when I was in cadets, and I enjoyed that. But I didn't consider that real writing. You know, that's just school and stuff. And my astronaut dreams were very quickly squashed by everybody around me. You know, you're a girl, you can't be an astronaut. You're Canadian, you can't be an astronaut. Well, all of those things aren't true anymore. But I did decide and focus on becoming a pilot, and that's what I did. And I thought that's as close as I could get. And I really enjoyed that. And then I got sick and blew out a portion of my esophagus. So, you know, they had it all taped up. I had to work in an office, which almost killed me. And when they finally got it repaired, things went terribly wrong. And I ended up in Toronto General, which if anybody is ever sick, please go there. It's the most wonderful hospital in the universe, where, you know, they managed to save my life and patch me back up. But it was months and months. And then I got home, and one of the last things that, you know, I'd been told is, okay, you know, you're going to live, you're going to, you know, have pretty much a full life, but you're never going to get your medical back. You're never going to fly. And I shut down. Our house was half renovated, so we were in the basement, the only room that was like clean enough. So we were living downstairs. There was no drywall on the walls. There was nothing. And my poor wife, she went through basically 2 years because I couldn't cope. The idea that I might have to go work in an office again or do something like that. And she kept trying to interest me in stuff, bringing different things home, you know. So she'd bring home books every week. She was going to Glad Day to buy books for me. And then she'd bring home stuff she saw for sale at work. So she brought home a kiln and tried to get me interested in pottery, and tried to get me interested in painting, and tried to get me. And then finally she brought home an old laptop she'd bought at work, and smacked that down. And she said, if you're not going to do anything, then you're going to start writing about what's going on with you. And I did, and it was sort of a catharsis, and I went through that, but it wasn't anything anyone could read. But then I'd been reading all these romances, and, we were having dinner one night, and she said, why don't you take a swing at one of those? And it's like, well, I can't write that stuff. She said, why not? Write. And then she said, write what you want. And I had this idea for an Indigenous sort of team adventure, but I'd been reading a lot of military intrigues, so well, I'll just swing it all together and see what I come up with. And out of that, and 5 years of writing, came the Contrary Warriors trilogy that won me so many awards. And I'm still proudest of that one today.
So, Sheryl Wright, you are an author, you're an engineer, you're a pilot. When did you become a pilot? Was that because you couldn't become an astronaut?
Yeah, really, I wanted, since the time I was 9, I said I'd be an astronaut. And we were up at my grandfather's cottage, and I was, getting pretty much picked on from my mother and aunts about this ridiculous idea. And him and I went out in the rowboat one day to do some fishing. And he just said, don't listen to them. They all think whatever, but that's for their lives, not yours. You're going to do what you want to do. And I said, well, if I can't be an astronaut. And just then there was a 747 flying overhead, and we both looked up and started to laugh. And he said, 747 is pretty close, don't you think? And I laughed, and I said, okay. So that was like at 10 years old, that decision was made. So for a poor kid from the wrong side of the tracks, the fastest way to do that was join the military, which ironically enough, I didn't learn to fly there as a military pilot, but had civilian training while I was in the military, and then went on to down to a military college in the States to finish up my training.
And when you started to fly, you were a commercial pilot?
I finished my commercial training in the States. I got a short-time job in, what's the place down at the very end of Florida there?
The Keys? Florida Keys?
Yes. Yeah. Flying a seaplane, just sort of taxiing people from different places up towards Miami or Key Largo, that kind of thing.
And were there a lot of female pilots back when you were a pilot?
In the academy where I was finishing my training, there were 3 of us. One was from England, I was from Canada, and there was one American. And I guess there was in our academy class about 27 guys. So, and that was a good ratio at the time. They said most classes they only had 1 female.
Mm. And you were talking about this earlier, that you had an incident, an accident, and that is what changed your life, essentially, from being a pilot to being an author. How do you see that incident now in 2021 that happened to you?
Now I look back and it was, in a way, it was a gift. You look at, I look at it now and think, could I have really just flown a schedule for another 20 years? And the answer is no. I think, to be honest, if I'd still been flying commercially when Afghanistan started, I would have volunteered to go back, which would have upset my wife to no end. So maybe that would have been the thing that I needed to do, something far more interesting. But, let's be honest, flying a schedule for an airline is kind of like driving a bus. You just get in, you've got all your flights data set up, you've checked your weather, you walk around the airplane, get in, you fly from Toronto to wherever you're flying to. So Fort Lauderdale, you're there for an hour, you fuel up, you check the fuel chits, you check the weather again, and then you fly back. Most of the time you're on autopilot, so it's really the takeoff and landing you get paid for. And there is no view better, especially at night, from the flight deck of an aircraft. You take off from Miami and get to even 10,000 feet. And as you're climbing, the whole world drops away, and all you can see is this line of lights all the way up the East Coast. And even if you'd lost every bit of your navigation equipment, everything else, you could just follow those lights all the way up to Boston, and then make a nice little left turn for Toronto, and you'd be there. So it's quite amazing, but I'm not sure that I was meant to just do that job for 20, 30 more years. So in a way, at the time it broke me, but maybe that's what I needed, because it was a gift to send me on a new direction where I could be creative and make my days feel like they were adding up to something.
And your time as a pilot, as a commercial pilot, did you run into homophobia from straight pilots, or misogyny from male pilots? Did you get any resistance being a female pilot in a very male-dominated industry?
All the time. When I got to one of the airlines I started with was called Bearskin Airlines, and it's a wonderful airline if you get a chance to fly with them. They're very safe. They fly north of Lake Superior. But at the time, there was a lot of bullshit. So I got hired and constantly heard this, like, why'd they hire her? We already have a female. As if it's like one thing, you have to hire one and you're done. That kind of thing. And then being gay or being a lesbian out in someplace that far north was, unheard of to them. They just, I might as well have said I was a unicorn. The misogyny, I was constantly put on the bottom of the rotation list, even though I was a better pilot with more time than, a lot of the guys, shit like that. When I got to Canadian, I really loved Canadian. I thought they were the airline that would beat Air Canada. Idiotically, I thought that. But one of the first things they tell you when we were doing our training is, well, they didn't tell them, they told me, took me aside and said, when you're on flight deck, of course, they were still calling it a cockpit back then. When you're in the cockpit, all communications with the passenger will be made with a male pilot. And I'm like, what? So when it's my turn to announce, oh, we're at 30,000 feet, blah, 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 I can't do that. He said, no, because the passengers don't have any confidence in women.
Oh my God.
I know. And it was just like, oh, maybe they would if, they got aboard and the first thing they heard was, hi, this is Captain Sheryl Wright,
yes,
and blah, blah, blah. And I know Air Canada was doing the same at the same time. And, I know that has changed. But even today, when I notice several airlines, when they get an all-female crew, they switch them to the cargo side. So, it's just crazy. And I don't get it. So.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So Sheryl Wright, you are part of the LGBT community. You are a proud lesbian, trailblazing lesbian, pilot, author. You're also two-spirit. For myself, for the listening audience, how would you describe the two-spirit community and being two-spirit? Talk to me about this.
Well, being two-spirits is easy because we just, in the Indigenous community, we look at all LGBT people as two spirits, as having a spirit from both sides of the spectrum. And most often, LGBT people or two-spirit people are considered as being possible medicine people, carrying special gifts, and in the past were celebrated. Unfortunately, through the teachings in residential schools and the churches and all of the churches have sort of beaten those ideas out. So in many communities, being two spirits is looked down upon, or it confuses people. And that's a very sad thing. Both myself and the other two spirit people that I know do carry medicine teachings we could deliver, have those special gifts that we were born with, or in my case, learned as I was, when I was sick. And so we have so much to give to the community, but the community is not really in a place where they can hear it. And so that's sad. I think once we get more settled with this whole finally facing what happened at residential schools and do some more healing, then maybe people will be ready to call on two-spirit members of their communities to visit those teachings again and help bring communities back together, help them heal. I'm hoping that's my hope for the future.
Mm. From your lips to God's ears.
Mm-hmm.
So you were just mentioning about residential schools, and I believe dating back to the 1800s, created by Christian churches and the Canadian government as an attempt to educate and convert Indigenous youth and to assimilate them into Canadian society. The last residential school closed in 1996. Recently, the remains of hundreds of Indigenous children have been discovered in unmarked graves near sites of former residential schools. Basic question for you, Sheryl Wright, just to keep it open, to get your general thoughts. What are your thoughts on what's been happening recently when it comes to everything around residential schools and unmarked graves? What are your thoughts?
Okay, this is a big subject. So let's start with what residential schools were. And for anybody who is really still thinking that this was about education or anything else, let me correct you. This was about assimilation and nothing else. It was about taking children from their communities, stripping away their language, their culture, their beliefs, and turning them into little white people. My great-grandmother once said they took her son away, her beautiful son away, and for 14 years, and sent her back an angry white man. Mm. And I think that's really sums up what happened. Is if you were assimilated, you came back confused and angry, because we all need our culture to lean on, to be part of something. And you cannot be part of the white culture and not be white. You can live amongst white people, go to white schools, do all these things, but there's still a part of you that is this other thing. And it will kill you from the inside out if you can't recognize it or celebrate it. And I think when you look at, 150, 160 years of this bullshit, you can't help but feel the pain that communities have gone through. I think this whole thing with finding the graves, identifying the children is probably the best thing that could happen. One, it's a wake-up call to the rest of the country who've been trying to pretend that, Indians get everything for them and all this other bullshit they believe, which has nothing. No, it just doesn't. Oh boy, it doesn't even happen. And all these other things that people believe in. When's it going to stop? How much do we have to give them? Blah, 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 blah. It's like, you're just paying rent, so get over it. And, but I think it opens eyes to everyone, but the community especially. There is nothing stronger and more healing than bringing back missing children. It doesn't matter if they've been missing for 150 years or 15 years. To bring them back, put a name on their graves, to properly put them to rest, is probably the biggest healing thing that all of our communities need at the moment. And it's probably the one thing that can bring those communities back into balance and start a complete healing. No community's ever been able to fully heal. You can look at just how unbalanced they are and know things aren't right yet. And when you take still children year after year, generation after generation, things can never be balanced. So I think this is, I know I'm going on and on, but I think this is probably the best thing. And I'm glad, I know the federal government just offered up another 32 million to finding graves and identifying remains. And I think that's just a start. I think every residential school in the country has to be turned upside down, and the properties they were on. And that's another thing. In a lot of places, the church has sold those properties. They didn't return them to the community, which I find outrageous. They sold them to other communities. There have been, when you look at places like Caledon, there have been housing developments built on the places where they believe that children's bodies were buried. So I don't even know if people can really understand how outrageous this whole thing was and has been, and how much the Indigenous community needs to recover. So I think this is step one, a real step one, and anything I can do, and I hope other people can do to support it, I hope they will.
When these stories started to come to light recently, did these stories surprise you? Or was it just a matter of time in your mind?
It was just a matter of time. You know, we've often talked about picking up a shovel and offering to go, dig up other people's grandmother's graves and put them in our museums or stuff like this. And people are outraged when we say things like that. But when anthropologists dig up where our grandparents were buried, it's science, it's education. But they don't understand that, this has been going on since Canada became a country. A lot of people want to blame Queen Victoria and the colonizers and that, but you really have to blame the country. Victoria's government, when she approved Dominion for Canada, had very clearly stated that all relations with First Nations had to be maintained at the same level or higher. I don't think she had in mind that they were going to build schools and take children away from their parents. I don't think that ever would have been approved. But here we are today, and we're going to have to fix what from our founding fathers, as they would be called, all the way down to governments in the 90s have done and covered up, and how much the church has covered up. And we're going to have to fix it.
Mm-hmm. Well said. So, military thrillers, lesbian fiction, nonfiction, these are just some of the topics that your novels revolve around. When people read your latest novel, Illusion Lake, what would you like your audience, your readers, to come away with after reading Illusion Lake?
First, I want them to have fun. I want them to put it down and say, wow, I really enjoyed that story. And then after they've had a couple of days to, just enjoy that, I would like them to say, I wonder if this is an issue in my community. And that's all. Just think about it.
Sheryl Wright, thank you for being on the show. Thanks for your time.
Oh, it was an absolute pleasure, Mark. Always nice to talk. Setting her beer down, Kiva stretched out on the couch, staring out the window at the lake. According to her dad, the world had recently discovered Illusion Lake, and suddenly the offers for large development plots were pouring in. He had received several offers for her mother's home, the place she was currently enjoying, and even more for the little cottage next door with its extra acreage. Her dad had no intention of kicking Mark and Andy out of their little home when they were just getting on their feet, but he was thinking of severing the lot and contracting Mark to build a new home. It would be on the opposite side of the cottage, and if Mandy and Mark wanted to rent it or rent to own, he would let them and then demolish the one they were living in now, increasing the land around their existing family home. As for the airport and old Elliott's estate, when she spoke with her dad earlier in the evening, he admitted he hadn't been out to the hangar. His partner had done the initial survey and had trusted his findings. She didn't break his bubble on his partner's behavior, but did ask how life was treating Ian. Her father noted his recent divorce and speculated that he might be a bit overextended with his 2 youngest boys in college, but he wasn't worried about Ian. When she mentioned Ian's offer for the firm to buy the hangar, he assured her Ian probably had a buyer in mind, as it was not ethical for the partnership to make such an offer. He suggested she drop in to see Gent Kohler. Besides being the mayor of Illusion Lake, he owned the only bank in town and would have a better idea if someone had their eye on the old hangar or the airport redevelopment plan. She didn't mention that she thought old gentleman rancher Gent Kohler was the creepiest guy in town. She wouldn't put her money in his bank, and she certainly wouldn't subject herself to a face-to-face meeting. Just knowing he and Ian were thick as thieves was all she needed to know. Influence and power be damned. She wasn't going to Gent. Her father had sounded so confident on the phone, but she herself wasn't so sure. There was another way. She called the one person she had been avoiding since she arrived. Erica Dunbar was a gossip and a flirt of the first order, but she was the go-to source for everything real estate in the county. And Erica had already hit up Elliott, offering her card within an hour of her arrival. Kiva wasn't ready to tip her hand, not yet, but she did need information. Maybe playing the helpful attorney to Elliott was her next move. She reminded herself to be cautious. Whatever she said to Erica, the whole town would know within the hour. Discretion just wasn't something the woman understood. Kiva! Here we go, Kiva thought. Erica, how are you?
By the way, Illusion Lake is available wherever you get your favorite books. And on Amazon.ca, Illusion Lake has a rating of 4 out of 5 stars. For even more on this award-winning author, SherylWright.com.
Hi, I'm Garrett Conley, author of Boy Erased, a memoir. You're listening to Rainbow Country with Mark Tara.
Bill 7, to ban discrimination in employment, government services, and housing, based on a person's sexual orientation, was up for a vote at Queen's Park. Most NDP and Liberal MPPs supported the bill, but without some progressive Conservative legislators' backing, a divisive split could rack the province. 4 PCs decided to break party ranks to vote with their conscience and support Bill 7. Cabinet Minister and MPP Dennis Timbrell did it to show solidarity for his beloved brother, the well-known drag queen Rusty Ryan. And for me, a gay politician who was not yet out, I had to take a stand. We were known as the Gang of 4. I'm former Cabinet Minister and MPP Phil Gillies. The date, December 2nd, 1986, when LGBT rights came to Ontario.
Hi, this is Police Constable Danielle Botno, also known as LGBT Cop, and you're listening to Rainbow Country with Mark Tara.
And just like that, this little gay journey through Rainbow Country has come to an end. For the full 2-hour episode, just head over to marktara.com, where everything is connected, and hit the archives banner. To keep up to date with the show, follow me on socials at Mark Tara Music. The podcast is available on all major platforms, including audible.com. Finally, I want to take this time to thank you for taking your time to be with me. Remember, stay well, stay strong, and stay safe.